back with me to Luke chapter 5. And we're going to go to the beginning of the chapter. Luke chapter 5. And we're going to begin at verse 1 and read down to verse 11. So Luke chapter 5, starting at verse 1. And it says, One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God, he saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. And then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I'll let down the nets." And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So he signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. And when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. For now on you will catch men." And so they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Within that chapter of Luke, we have 2 accounts of Jesus calling his disciples, those that would eventually follow him and get caught up in that grand journey, that great mission of fishing for men. And over the last, this is the 4th week that we've been looking at that topic. I guess it's the 5th week, really, that we've been looking at that topic of fishing for men, fishing for people. 3 weeks ago, we started this journey of walking across the room. And the first thing that we looked at was the single greatest gift that we can offer to those around us. And the single greatest gift, of course, is a relationship or an introduction to their Creator, the lover of their souls, God Himself. That's the single greatest gift that we have to give. The single greatest gift that people can receive. And then a few weeks ago we looked at what it means to live in 3D. Now I'm going to ask you a question. This is kind of a quiz time. Does anybody remember what those 3 Ds are? Do you remember what the first D is? That's number 2. Discover stories is the second one. But before you discover stories, you got to initiate something. Develop a friendship. That's right. You got to develop a friendship. So we begin by developing friendships with people who are around us. I was talking with a gentleman just this week, and he's actually a bivocational pastor, Dan Austin. He's out of Kiersterville. And one of the blessings he said that I have as someone who's bivocational is that I'm in the school, and I'm rubbing elbows with people who don't know Jesus all the time. I'm developing friendships all the time with people. And then, of course, as Tracy said, we're to discover stories, to find out people's history, to find out where they are, what's happened in their lives, what's happened to bring them to this point in their journey. And then, of course, as we develop friendships and discover stories, we're to discern the appropriate next steps, to rely upon God, to seek His guidance, to seek His direction, as Bill Hybels calls it, operate in those zones of the unknown. Going from our zones of comfort, we can hang around the people that we're really comfortable with, but taking that journey outside that into, the great unknown, to boldly go where no one has gone before, to seek out new friendships, to live in 3D. And this gives us a framework to live life. And last week we looked into the power of story, and how we all have a story, and how we all have a before and after. Before we met Christ and after we came to faith, where we are in that. And we looked at how critical it is, how much weight our words carry, that we can encourage, build up, or we can hurt and tear down through our words, and how important it is. And so today we move on to this grander vision living, which is really wrapping up our whole just walk across the room experience. And I think the best way for us to use the remaining time that we have here this morning within this series is to look at a question: how do we maintain momentum? How do we continue on? Because a lot of times we can spend time looking at a topic or spending time on the topic, and then after we leave that, where does it go? It kind of goes into the back of your brain and you lose it, But this morning I want to encourage you to keep up the momentum, taking the walks across the room, engaging people in conversation, discovering stories, seeking God's help for the next steps. You see, as we go, one of the greatest things that we have to give, of course, is Jesus. And He's the one that can make a significant impact on people's lives, to transform people's hearts. In my weekly email, I gave you a link to go on YouTube to look at cardboard testimonies. I told you about that last week. I don't know if any of you went there and looked at that, but I'll tell you, every time I watch that, there's certain ones that come up and they cause me to cry as I'm watching them, because there's, diagnosed with cancer, and then they flip over cancer-free for 3 years. Just different things can really impact your heart. It's people's stories. It's where they've come from. It's what God has taken them from and made them into. How He has transformed a heart. When we look here in this chapter 5 of Luke's Gospel, you have Peter, who, I don't know if it was reluctant or not, but Jesus got into his boat and said, "Take me out. I want to teach from, out there where I'm not being crowded in." And then it's the day they did night fishing. They didn't have flashlights, by the way, to be able to draw the fish to them, but they fish at night. And Jesus says to Peter, He says, "Put your net out." "What? You're a carpenter. You don't know anything about fish. What do you know about fish? I've been out there all night fishing, and I didn't catch a thing. My buddies are in there, they're cleaning up the nets. We didn't catch anything." "What do you mean, put your nets out?" Well, something must have been in his eyes. He must have caught something, because he said, "But because you said to, all right, I guess so. I'll just put the nets out just to appease you, I'll put them out, we'll bring them back in, then we'll go into shore, and might go home and get something to eat at home." Well, what happens? The nets are bursting. It says that they had so many fish that he had to call his buddies in. "Get out here. Get into the boat and get out here. We got so much fish out here. There's more than enough for one boat. There was more than enough for 2 boats. Almost swamping the boats." I suspect that this is one of the greatest hauls that they've ever had. If you've ever watched Deadliest Catch, those snow crab, it has nothing to do, nothing on the little, 5 or 6 of them. They were just jam full in their boats. And then they come back. And what is it that Simon does? He falls at Jesus' feet. knows that there is something about him, and he follows it. Bill Hybel says about this passage, he says, "Now I don't know about you, but in my estimation, supernaturally, filling some fish nets is a fairly odd means of recruiting a few disciples. Interesting choice, given all the amazing strategies at Jesus' disposal. But here's what I think is even more interesting. I believe this odd miracle sets up one of the most critical aspects of Jesus' teaching, the idea of small fish versus big fish." If you remember a number of weeks ago, we were talking about fishing for people. He says, think about this with me. From the moment he arrived on the scene, all the way up until today, Jesus has been asking all sorts of people, from teachers, students, armed forces folks, plumbers, electricians, business people, plant workers, stay-at-home moms, doctors, nurses, and all the rest, this one question: are you going to throw your one and only life into pursuing small fish, or will you risk tossing your nets out there in anticipation of catching the human-sized ones, the big fish? Are you going to dive headlong into the grander vision, or are you the type who settles for the lesser one? And so this morning we're going to look at two things. The first one is that we need to make people a priority. Jesus wanted these three career fishermen. Who was it? Peter, James, John. There's actually another one. Do you remember what Peter's brother's name was? Simon is his name. He got renamed to Peter. But his brother's name was? Andrew. That's right. And he called these guys, as well as us, the people here in Norton United Baptist Church, to understand that this life is all about people. That's part of the grander vision of living, is where we put the priority always on people. He wanted them and us to prioritize people above everything else that grabs for our attention. Because there's a lot of things that can grab for our attention. There's a lot of things that can derail us. There's a lot of things that can take our focus off of the grander vision. As when I started this series, there's more important business on this planet than insurance or healthcare or whatever. The greatest, the most important business on the face of this planet is the people business, right? No earthly effort is as important as the business of sharing Jesus' love, acceptance, and forgiveness with other folks. Because people are just all around us looking for love. And I can't remember who sang the song, but they're looking for love in all the wrong places. Trying to fill that God-shaped hole with other things other than what really fills that God-shaped hole, and that is a relationship with Jesus himself. See, we need to prioritize people. We need to take walks across rooms or streets or halls or wherever we are. We need to care about people more than ourselves. Having a radical inclusiveness for people, even if they look different or if they talk different or if they act different. Jesus asks all of us to walk across the room people. To see the grander vision. That it's bigger than just making a living, waking up in the morning, brushing our teeth, going to work, coming back, watch a little TV, go to sleep. It's bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. It's the big fish opportunity that waits us all. Sharing the love, acceptance, and forgiveness of Christ. And Jesus was clear on this. In Matthew 5:16, he said, let your light shine before others in such a way that they may see your good works and then glorify your Father who is in heaven. You see, we need to shine our lights in such a way. So, if he says in such a way, that means that there's more than just one way. We're not all the same. We don't live in the same sphere. We don't live in the same house. We're not all the same people. And so in such a way that there's more than one way. I think that Jesus is saying that we get to choose whether or not, as well, we let our light shine to impact people. You see, our light will either shine on people and point them towards the Father, or we'll keep our lights to ourselves and, in essence, deny the people we're supposed to care for an introduction to God. Make sure your light shines in such a way. I think Jesus is saying that people can come to know my Father because of how you treat them, because of how you respond to them, because of how you embrace them, because of how you prioritize them. And whose light was Jesus talking about in Matthew's passage? Let your light shine before others in such a way that they may see your good works and then glorify who? Father God. Right? Let your light shine. Not your pastor's light, not your small group leader's light, not all your Christian friends' lights. No, he says your light. Meaning each one of us has a role to play. I want to read to you a brief quote from Just Walk Across the Room that I think sums up this very well. It says, you don't have to be any more talented, any richer, any slimmer, any smarter, any more or less of anything to partner with God. All you have to be is willing to be used by Him in everyday ways. It's a great quote, isn't it? God has shaped you and made you into the person who you are to be able to impact the people who are on your love path. Do you remember the love path? Location, occupation, vacation, education, where you spend your time. God has shaped you in such a way to be able to impact the people who He has placed in your life. Jesus knew that if you and I would build a lifestyle around accepting people, getting to know them, caring for people, serving people, listening to people, embracing people, befriending people, exposing people to Christ Himself, if we prioritized people, we would never crave our old ways again. Simple as that. Have you ever had someone say to you, I'll never believe that. Don't bother me with things like that. I'll never believe that. I'm going to give you something, an encouragement. Change the never to not for now. Okay? Change the never to not for now. Isn't that a great perspective? If someone says never, change that in your own mind, not for now. It's a perspective that forms another vital part of grander vision living. And that's the second thing I want to talk about this morning. And that's that we need to focus on potential. To focus always on potential. It didn't seem to matter to Jesus that His soon-to-be disciples were men whose first response to His command was a little south of obedience. What did Peter say when Jesus said to him, put your nets in? I don't think so. But I've been fishing all night. And we've caught how many fish? Nothing. I think they were saying, hey, Who do you think you are anyway? We're the experts here. We're the fishermen. We've been working the nets. We've been slaving all night without sleep while you've been counting sheep or creating sheep, whatever it is you do. And now you want us to listen to you about catching fish? I don't know if I shared it with you before, but in a Jewish man's life, when they were boys, okay, they would be taught the first 5 books of the Old Testament, okay? Not only taught, but they would have to memorize them by the age of 13, okay? And then what would happen at the age of 13 is the rabbi would then choose his disciples, who he felt was, the best of the best. And he would invite them to become his disciples at the age of 13. The ones who just didn't make the team, well, he would send them to dad and say, go learn your father's trade. Because in those days, the father taught the son what he did, and that's what you did. And so, at 13, if you didn't make the team, you were cut, okay? So then there's the boys at the age of 13 who are then to learn the rest of the Old Testament. And when I mean learning the rest of the Old Testament, they're to memorize the rest of the Old Testament. Okay? So by about the age of 18, they've been working on this for a few years. At the age of about 18, if they're doing really good, then they become part of the rabbi's disciples. Those that just don't make it, well, they're cut from the team. And so, go learn your father's trade. And so, a rabbi gets the best of the best of the best. Well, Simon, Andrew, James, and John, what are they doing? They're fishermen, right? They got cut from the team. They're part of the B team. They're the ones that didn't make it, didn't have what it took to be a disciple of a rabbi. And here Jesus is, calling them to be part of his team. You get a second chance to make it to the major leagues. He calls them to catch fish. They weren't the most obvious choice for the best followers of the Messiah. But Jesus saw what these guys could be. What they could be like once they were given a choice and a chance to live for that grander vision. Some of us may feel like we're part of the B team. But Jesus looks past self-centeredness and sees the potential for servanthood. He looks past the rebelliousness of the past and the potential for righteousness in his kingdom. He looks past a quick temper and sees the potential for someone to be a kingdom builder. Aren't you glad that Christ did that for you? I know I'm glad that he saw past what I used to be. He called me to be part of his team. That he saw what I was like before and made me into something completely different after. I think I've shared this with you before. Maybe I haven't. I can't remember. But my dad, when he was dying, he asked my friend the question, where did he come from? Because he noticed something in me that wasn't like my brother Billy, that I was different than him, that I wasn't like George Dunn. And the answer to that question is that at age 16, when I decided to follow Christ, when I decided to make Jesus my master, well then, I was no longer, in a sense, George Dunn's son, because God transformed me into a new creation. He clothed me in Christ, and my personality was not like my dad's. And so my father noticed that difference. I never knew if he did until then. Where did he come from? There's a before and there's an after. And Christ saw in me and he saw in you potential. And isn't that what we need to look for in other people? Is potential. See, everybody has something that needs to be shaped, needs some shaping, a little refinement, a healthy dose of God's perspective before they come to Christ. And the key is to let God do His work in people's lives and hearts through you. Jesus saw potential in little Zacchaeus when he came up to the sycamore fig tree. He saw potential in dirty, down old scoundrel Levi, who was a tax collector. He called him to be part of his team. You see, what was Matthew's life consumed by before he followed Jesus? Money. Right? It's all about the money. And then he put that aside and he followed Christ. And I love the change. I mean, sometimes change takes a long time. It's a process of becoming more like Christ. But right there, something happened in Matthew, something happened in this guy that used to be called Levi, that then was called Matthew. Something happened to him that transformed his life, and he encountered something that he had to give away. And so he threw a party. He invited over all of his friends. And of course Jesus as well. He wanted all of his tax collecting buddies to meet this guy that revolutionized his life. It changed him from the inside out. He began on that first day being salt and light in the lives of people who were around him, right there and then. And you know what Matthew also saw? He knew these guys, these other tax collectors. He saw the potential that they had. And he wanted them to know this Jesus that saw the potential in his life as well. That's being grander vision people. Making people a priority. Focusing on people's potential. You see, once you dig into people's lives, once you trust the Holy Spirit to navigate your every turn, every maneuver, once you start living in this grander vision, it's hard to go back to catching a little perch when you're catching, huge salmon. People. It's hard to go back to the lower, lesser visions. One of the things I wanted that we're going to do this morning is come before Christ and with the table, communion, and here Jesus knew where he was going and took the opportunity to speak into the lives of his disciples, to encourage them. And this morning I want to encourage you. Because sometimes we can look out and we can see so many people that we know that really need to know Christ. I don't want you to look at everybody around you. It's easier if you focus on one person at a time. To be able to connect with one person at a time. Each one win one. It's a song that we sang through the course of this series as well. Each one win one. And so this morning as we come to the table, this is also a time to commit our lives to a grander vision living, being His in even deeper ways. And so as we come to the table, we're going to sing as we prepare. Number 586.